HMRC writes to you tomorrow, would you know the 3 words that can turn a simple letter into a full investigation? Well, sadly, most people wouldn't. As a business accountant, I deal with HMRC for business owners all the time, and I've seen the same situation go to very different ways depending on how the person responds. So in this video, I'll show you the exact words you should never say to a tax inspector and how to respond instead. But first, let me show you why one wrong reply can be the difference between a small issue and a penalty you can't afford. Let me give you an example that will make this very clear. Imagine 2 ordinary travelers going through passport control at the airport. The first one is asked a simple question: what was the purpose for your trip? And he keeps it simple. A week's holiday to visit my parents, for example. He gets on 1 or 2 more easy questions and he passes through. No problem. The second traveler gets nervous and the same question makes them panic. He says something like, well, mostly holiday, but I did a little bit of work and I'm bringing back some gifts and I wasn't sure about this one thing. So the officer is now interested. He gets put to one side, bags opened. 2 hours later, he walks out having done nothing wrong, but it was a long, stressful morning and it was completely avoidable. And HMRC works in a similar way as that border control officer. By the time their letter reaches you, they have usually already spotted something. A number that doesn't match, a figure that looks wrong, or maybe something is missing. That doesn't mean you have necessarily done something wrong, but when you receive a letter, they usually have some questions for you. And the way you answer these questions is what decides whether this letter stays simple or grows into a full investigation. The problem is, most people panic when they receive one of these letters. That's why being ready before a letter ever arrives makes such a big difference. But what does being ready mean? It means knowing what to say when they ask and knowing the few things you should never say. But before we get into it, one key rule I want you to remember is to keep everything in writing. A letter or an email means you're never answering under pressure, and if HMRC ever calls you, you're perfectly allowed to ask them to put the questions in writing so you can answer it properly. With that being said, let me show you the few things you should never say to a tax investigator and exactly how to reply instead. When HMRC gets in touch, they're usually trying to work out what kind of situation they're dealing with. Broadly speaking, they're trying to sort you out into one of 3 groups of people. Someone who made an honest mistake, someone who was careless, or someone who is hiding something. And a few wrong words, sometimes as little as 3, can make that decision for them before you even realize it. And just to be clear, we are not talking about a general nudge letter or something more serious such as a deliberate tax fraud. We are mainly talking about a formal compliance check where HMRC asks something specific. So let's start with the first thing you never tell a tax inspector. Imagine you get a letter asking about some income you didn't declare. Let's say you've been selling things on eBay as a little side hustle. And over time, this income quietly grew into something that should have been reported on a tax return. Of course, we're not talking about your old clothes or personal items, but rather something you're selling for a profit and you have crossed the 1,000 tax-free trading allowance. Now, eBay would have probably reported your sales figure directly to HMRC under the new platform reporting requirements introduced in 2024. So, if you believe you have an undeclared income, it's better to contact HMRC first and tell them upfront before they send you a letter. That's called an unprompted disclosure. And if you come forward instead of waiting to be called, your penalty can be reduced to the lowest possible amount, sometimes even as low as 0. But let's say you didn't get the chance to report it, and the letter comes to your door anyway. Many people in this situation would respond in the most natural way possible. They would say something like, I didn't know I had to declare any of this. And from your perspective, you've done nothing wrong. You genuinely didn't know the rules, and if there is a tax to pay, you're happy to pay it. So being honest feels like exactly the right thing to do, and it is. The problem isn't your honesty, the problem is using I didn't know as your explanation. Now here's exactly what I mean. When HMRC looks at income you didn't declare, they're deciding whether you took reasonable care, whether you were careless, or even worse, whether you were deliberate. And which category you fall into determines how far back they can look when questioning your tax return. So the rules is roughly 4 years for ordinary errors, 6 years where carelessness is involved, and up to 20 years for deliberate behavior or serious failures to notify. So if you say, I didn't know, it's not my fault, how was I supposed to know, and you get defensive, that pushes you towards the careless or deliberate group. And those are the groups that cost you the most. So your job is not to deny that you didn't know, it's to show that you've made an honest mistake. And how you do this depends on your case, but there are some strong signs you can point to. A strong indication is, for example, if the income built up slowly over time rather than appearing overnight, or that it sits in your normal bank account the whole time where nothing was hidden, and that you're ready to hand over any evidence they need and are happy to cooperate. So you don't lead with "I didn't know" necessarily, because those three words quietly label you as careless and invite a penalty you may not deserve. Instead, you stay open and helpful, set out the honest reasons someone in your situation could have got this wrong, and you show what you did try to get right. There's no promise you'll dodge a penalty completely, but HMRC reduces your penalty based on how readily you tell them what happened, how much you help them understand it, and whether you give them access to the records. An inspector who sees you doing all these three things is far more likely to keep that penalty small and reasonable. Which brings us to the second thing you should never do during a tax check, and this is you don't overshare. A lot of compliance check letters ask about one specific thing, one figure, one source of income, so all you need to do is answer that one thing. But here is what sometimes happens. You start replying about, let's say, your rental income, exactly what they asked about on the letter. But then you keep going. Oh, and I should probably mention there were a few things I sold on eBay I wasn't sure about. And I did a little bit of work for a friend, for example. Things that didn't even need reporting in the first place. And without meaning to, you've just handed your caseworker several new things to look at. Every extra detail you offer is one more thing they'll want to check. So instead, you answer only what they ask, and if they want more, they'll come back and ask for it. So in general, don't treat the inspector like your therapist. That doesn't mean you should hide things you know are wrong, such as other undeclared income. You should definitely disclose those, even if you're not asked, because as I mentioned earlier, doing so can sometimes mean there is no penalty at all. What I do mean is don't volunteer unrelated details that were never issued in the first place and may only make your situation more complicated, just like with the airport example earlier. Now, the third thing you should never say sounds like the responsible move, which is exactly why it's so easy to say. Let's say the letter arrives. You're not sure what to do, so you quickly reply something along the lines of, "Ask my accountant." It feels right because you're pointing HMRC to the expert and you're stepping out of the way. The problem is that you're ultimately responsible for your tax return, no matter who filed it, which is why it's very important to choose carefully the accountant you work with. So saying something along the lines of, "It's not my problem," sounds like someone who has no idea what is going on in their own business. Now, I'm not telling you to keep your accountant out of this, quite the opposite. Using an accountant properly is one of the clearest ways to show that you've taken reasonable care. The danger is only using them as a wall to hide behind. So instead of pushing the blame onto your accountant, you bring them in to help you. You can even appoint another accountant if you want a second opinion. But either way, you stay involved. You give them the full, honest picture so they can defend you properly. Your accountant becomes your representative, not your shield you hide behind. Now, the fourth thing you should never say is, "I don't have the receipts." Imagine a letter asking for proof of something you claimed and you reply that you've lost the receipts or you never had them. Now, the moment HMRC hears your records have gaps, they start to wonder what else is missing. And that's how one small question can make them look into everything. And missing records is exactly the kind of thing that nudges you towards careless, where it starts to cost more. Now, if you're in this problem, having a receipt is the strongest proof you can have. But things happen. Sometimes you forget to save it, sometimes it gets misplaced, it goes missing. When that happens, you look for other ways to prove the purchase. For example, your bank and card statements show the money actually left your account. Sometimes the supplier can often send you a copy of the invoice. And if you're a tradesperson, the invoices from your own jobs can show the materials you must have bought to do the work. And that's how piece by piece, depending on your situation, you're trying to rebuild a picture that holds up. So the honest version of this reply becomes, "Here is what I can show you, and here's how I can prove the rest." And whatever you do, never fill that gap with something you've made up. A missing receipt is a small problem, but an invented one is a completely different matter. Now, the fifth thing almost every business owner says at one point is that it's all business. This response usually comes up when it's something you use for both work and your personal life. It's what we call a mixed use asset. For example, your car, which you drive for work but also to the supermarket on the weekend, or your home if you work from one room but obviously live there too. HMRC asks how much of it is really for the business, and sometimes the answer come out something along the lines of, oh, that's O business. And the word O is dangerous here. If you say something is 100% business and you can't prove it, that's not a small error. You've made a confident claim that turns out to be wrong. And that starts to look deliberate rather than careless, which is the worst place to be. So if you've kept a proper mileage record or you have clear logic of how much your home is used for work, you can claim 100% if that's possible and back it up with evidence. But if you don't have that proof, what you do is show how you reached the figure you claimed using whatever genuinely exists. The invoices from your jobs, for example, showing where you drove and why is a great evidence for mileage record, or a sensible way of working out how much of your home is used for the business, and whatever else fits your situation. That's how you turn it's all business into something more defensible, like it's mostly business and here is the split with the evidence behind it. When a caseworker sees you making a genuine effort to back up what you filed, they're far more likely to treat you fairly. And the last one is different from all the rest because it isn't something you say, it's something you never do. And that is, you don't ignore the letter. This is the most tempting mistake of all because the letter is frightening. So you put it in a drawer and tell yourself you deal with it later. Or you quietly hope that if you say nothing, it just goes away. And this is the single worst thing you can do because HMRC can then decide for themselves what they think you owe and add penalties on top, all without ever hearing your side of the story. And on top of this, saying nothing can look like someone who is hiding something. I'm not telling you to rush and fire off a panicked reply either. You don't have to send your full answer straight away. You simply have to acknowledge it before the deadline. Even a short email saying you received the letter and you're gathering the information puts you in a far better spot than just remaining silent. And if you genuinely need longer, you're allowed to ask for more time. The goal is just to never remain silent. So knowing how to answer an HMRC letter is something every business owner needs. But it's even more important to know what triggers these letters in the first place so you can avoid ever getting one. So watch this video next where I show you the 5 red flags that trigger a tax investigation.